Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Rox.
This is the Bourbon Barrel, and a very special episode today.
Very.
We actually
It's
have
awesome.
a very cool, very excellent man,
Right.
real estate agent, YouTube star,
Yeah. He's mastered a lot of things. Jeez.
family man, yeah, jack of all trades, and I'd just,
Yeah.
without
See,
further ado, we have,
see, it's not easy
yeah,
to. Yeah. See. Yeah. All right then. Yeah.
Randy Sullivan here with us. So, hi, Randy.
Thank you very
Uh,
much.
Gentlemen, glad to be on with you. Appreciate the invite.
Thanks for doing this. We appreciate
Oh
it.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Before we get started, I do have one question. Is just how do you find the time to do all of those things?
I only work, so I get up at 5:30 Monday through Friday. Myself and my entire family go to the gym,
Nice.
and we have to leave by 7 so they can get back to get ready for school. And I'm usually, unless I'm too tired from staying up too late, I'm usually able to start work at about 8, and I shut down at about 9 at night. And I work all the time. I usually work 4 or 5 hours a day on Saturdays and Sundays, but it doesn't feel like work, because I spend probably 70 to 80% of my time on whiskey stuff, which is also my hobby. And so I'm just, to me, I'm checking comments and I'm responding to tags and mentions on my Facebook group and things, but that's just me talking with my friends, right? So it doesn't really feel like work, which is actually a problem on the other end of the spectrum, because when you love what you do, it's very easy to mess up work-life balance because you don't realize how much you're working and how little, time, energy, and effort. So I have to be very intentional, and every day I should not every day, but I would say on average 4 nights a week out of the weekdays, I shut down for about 2 hours in the evening, and I prepare a nice meal, and we eat together as a family every night, just to keep that work-life balance. But I do work all the time.
Awesome.
Wow.
And speaking of work and the fruits of your labor, we have with us a couple samples that you were kind enough to give us.
This is the Prideful Go Bourbon 6
Yeah, the 6 year.
obviously.
Yep.
6 year can.
Cool.
Yeah, this is the bottle for those of you at home.
Nice.
I think
Is
I
this
got it.
available in New York?
It is available through Sealbox. So I believe they ship to New York. We are in negotiations with a couple of different wholesalers in the state. New York is a high priority market for us, and we're trying to get in there. But because of the 3-tier system laws, trying to bring a brand, even a brand that has as much recognition as this one, into a new market is a racket. It's a very, very difficult process. You'll spend 8 months.
Knowing what I know of New York, doing any business here is just a pain in the backside.
Yeah.
It's not.
Taxes
It's
are
not.
insane.
It's not because of New York, though. It's like what people don't realize. The average consumer doesn't even know that I make this whiskey and it's totally against the law for me to sell it to you. Completely against the law, right? I, as a producer, can only sell the wholesalers, and wholesalers are supposed to be my sales force. That's their job. And wholesalers typically make almost as much per bottle, if not more, than the distillery does. And that's shocking to people, right? And all they do is they have it shipped to their warehouse, and they have sales reps that have different accounts, like there's either on-premise or off-premise, and they'll go out to the retail stores that they have a relationship with. And different wholesalers do it different, but most wholesalers sell wine and spirits and, all of this stuff. And so they'll go in and they'll go, hey, I have 20 SKUs with you. I've checked, you need to reorder these 8 SKUs. And I have this new SKU that I think you should carry. Why don't you try it? And that's what you want from your wholesaler. But I like to use this analogy, and anybody who takes this as a misogynistic or in a way, don't take it that way. But imagine a man that's looking for a wife, and he goes and he's getting to know different prospective partners, and they're having very serious conversations about what their life together is going to be like after they get married. And then soon as she gets the ring, she sits on the couch and is like, yeah, I ain't doing any of that. You get out there. I'm going to stay right here on this couch and
Oh, you're gonna
you go
go.
make that money
I
and bring
Man,
it
this
home
is
to
not
me.
the
That's what,
first time this week I've had this conversation.
Really?
yeah.
Oh,
And that's what
goodness.
it's like with wholesalers a lot of times, because they all promise the sun, moon, and
Yeah,
the stars that they're going to get out there and
yeah.
pound the pavement, but not all of them do it. And we've got some really good wholesalers that have helped us, and it's remarkable to see, what happens for business whenever somebody really does that. But when you're in that courting period and you're trying to get to know each other,
Right.
the wholesalers are fearful that they're going to take on a brand that doesn't have the market recognition that they need it to for them to be effective, and I'm fearful that I'm going to get that wholesaler that's going to sign on the dotted line and then expect me to do all the work and they keep all the money. And so it's a long drawn out process, but we will eventually be in New York, hopefully this year. So
Yeah, that's
awesome.
very cool.
After you explained that story, I didn't know you knew my ex-wife. So, my apologies.
yeah.
But anyway, not my current, my ex-wife. So my wife is wonderful. But my ex.
Yeah.
Anyway, actually, it's a joke. We get along fine. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Before
But
she watches and then yells at me. You know,
I've had someone on my show that made a comment like that, and then they reach out to me months later. It's like, hey, yo, my ex-wife found that. Can you take that out? And I'm like, yeah. I had to figure out how to edit a published YouTube video just to fix stuff like that. So
Wow, yeah, I can't wait for that to happen someday.
all right. So do you guys have the
Yeah.
6 cord?
Yeah, the 6. Yeah, it's a nice nose.
Yeah,
Very
it's
pleasant.
a very pleasant nose.
What is the proof, if you don't mind? I mean, we don't.
The one you have is 114.8, and this is batch
Wow.
1 of the 6-year bourbon. So
Very
the Prideful
nice.
Goat
Wow, yeah.
will always be. I'm pouring myself a little too much. So the Prideful Goat will always be cask strength, non-chill filtered, because we're whiskey nerds. Me and my business partner. So my podcast and his podcast are on the back label. Christopher Hart runs Whiskey Neat podcast, and we want to make products that we would want to drink. And so when we are sourcing whiskey, we are picking whiskey that we feel like would be a good value. So that's kind of our promise to our consumer, is that we are not unique, because we are sourcing whiskey, and there are other companies that buy the same sources of whiskey as us. But our goal is that if there are other companies that are getting the same whiskey that are releasing it cask strength and non-chill filtered, which most aren't, because that is the least efficient way to make money, that we're the cheapest. Like, we want to be the value play for that whiskey. And it makes the job of sourcing whiskey a whole lot harder, because we have to say no 99% of the opportunities that we get to buy, because we know that the inline customer's price is not going to be where we want it to be for us to kind of maintain that trust relationship with our customer. So
It's very cool, like the fact that someone who's an enthusiast is actually built up an actual brand of their own whiskey and stuff. That's what you want in any type of hobby and stuff, is someone who has an appreciation and a love for the product.
Right.
Well, and it was a
I
complete accident. People used to ask me all the time when I really started getting into this, do you think you'll ever start your own brand of whiskey? And I'm like, hell no. I interview distillers. Their lives are terrible, right? You spend 5 years and you beg, borrow, and steal from every single person you've ever talked to. And that's all before you figure out whether or not you're going to go bankrupt, right? You have no idea. And but this opportunity to do it in a way that I felt comfortable with people that I knew would make it a success kind of fell into my lap because of the podcast. And so, a part of entrepreneurship is being willing to say yes when opportunity knocks, right? What's the old adage? It's better to be prepared for an opportunity that doesn't come than to be unprepared for an opportunity when it does. And I'm the kind of person that I'm always looking, for the silver lining and the opportunity, and willing to take action and take risks. So But anyway, so this is my 6-year product. It is a MGP bourbon. MGP has 2 mash bills, 2 rye mash bills. One's 21% rye, one's 36% rye. This one is 21% rye, so this is the lower rye mash bill, but still a really high rye content compared to most Kentucky producers. And it spent most of its time aging in Indiana, which is a very gentle, mild, aging environment. Brick facade warehouses. There's a river that runs along the backside of all the aging facilities that keeps the humidity super high, and it keeps the temperatures very even because it works kind of like a swamp cooler, and the buildings are extremely separated. So the last time I went there, it was snowing outside, and the warehouse was much warmer than it was outside, but it's also very cool in the summer because it just keeps everything pretty constant. And so some of the times some of the barrels that we release, the subsequent barrels, they'll actually have spent some time in the hot Texas environment, and I think future releases will taste quite different from this. Not necessarily better, just different.
Different. That's fair.
Have y'all tasted it yet?
Yeah, no, I haven't yet. Did you? Oh, okay. Sorry, I was listening.
Yeah, no, it's got some sweetness to it. I can taste just the subtleness of the rye there.
Yeah,
it gives it a nice little bite, but it's great. Like that's really
very
nice especially for a 6-year.
I hate using the word smooth, but because it's so overdone. But for when you said 114, right?
114.8, yeah. Most of our releases are around that 1.15 proof point because, as I mentioned, the aging environment's different there. So they barrel at 120, but they lose proof with time because of the high humidity. The barrels literally drink water out of the air and proof themselves down. And so we usually end up around that 115 mark. But it's a very layered and complex whiskey. I find that certain days, certain notes stick out to me quite a bit. Other days, I don't taste them at all. But it's pretty interesting. Pretty similar to previous offerings of Blonde Brothers and Smooth Ambler Old Scout and Nulu. It's the same whiskey that is Smoke Wagon. We're all releasing the same liquid, but everyone's got a little bit different take on it, especially if it ages in a different environment. It'll change quite a bit. And I've done an MGP flight before where we got MGP product from a bunch of different non-distiller producers and lined them up, and it's remarkable how different they are.
Right. Yeah, no, I've had a bunch of different Nulus. They're doing crazy experimental things like honey casks and all sorts of stuff.
Yep. I believe maple too. We saw maple something
maple,
cask.
I've not had something of theirs that I didn't enjoy, and it's MGP, so that makes sense.
Oh, it's very.
But this is nothing like that. But it's still like for a 6-year, it drinks like an older bourbon.
Right.
Like a much,
it drinks like a lower proof bourbon.
And it definitely doesn't taste 114. It's a lot.
Specifically not a bad 114.
Like if you get not a lot of burn for a 114.
This is I don't feel like I would have to mix this. We always say, throw Pepsi with that or something. That's not, when we find those, but that's very good for 114. Wow.
So if you don't mind me asking, what is the typical price point for a bottle of that?
MSRP on that is $64.99, but I'm guessing when we hit New York, it'll be closer to 75 because of taxes
and such here.
Yeah.
New York.
Yeah, and we're about to go into I don't know if I should say that. I'll say it anyway. I don't know how long it'll be.
Nice.
But we're working on a relationship for Alaska, and Alaska has like the second worst taxes in the U.S. They're called excise taxes for when you bring liquor in, and that becomes what they call laid-in costs. So we sell the product to wholesalers all across the country for the exact same amount, but it doesn't cost the same amount to get it from Houston, where our distillery is, to Anchorage, Alaska, as it does to get it to Lexington, Kentucky, right? So shipping costs are different, and then the excise taxes are different, and it causes price variance all across the country. But I'm finding that local consumers, because whatever the rules are for me, it's the same rules for Wild Turkey and Heaven Hill and everyone else.
Yep.
And so they're used to seeing those price variances. And I can sense it whenever I do podcasts, because I like to tell people how much I paid for my bottles. And one of the most common responses is, oh my God, I wish I could find that bottle for that price where I live. And I'm like, Texas has more excise taxes. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yes, that's
nice.
better in Texas.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very cool. Very cool.
How did you come about the Prideful Goat name? I don't believe I've heard that on a show, or I just missed it maybe.
It's a funny story. So we were supposed to just do a barrel pick of the whiskey that we're going to have next, which is a 15-year Kentucky Straight. And I was doing a distillery event, it was actually a Texas Whiskey Association event at the distillery. I met the distillery owner. He lets me try. He's like, hey, try my 15-year Kentucky Straight bourbon that I sourced. And I tried it, and I was like, oh man, this is great. And I said, can we do a single barrel? Because I run a whiskey club called Someone Say Whiskey that's 90-ish% North Texas, but we've got members all across the country. But there's about 15,000 members total. And
nice.
And so he agreed, but later we found out the whiskey was in totes and not in barrels. And that meant that if we picked the tote, we were committing to sell 1,300 bottles. And I didn't think that my club could handle that. So I called my buddy Christopher, who runs Houston Bourbon Society. He's also the founder of Houston Whiskey Social, which is the largest whiskey event in Texas. And he said, rather than us do like a split label on a tater sticker or something, what if we created a new brand? And I didn't even know you could do that. So I reached out to the distillery, and he was like, yeah, sure, I don't care. And the backstory is the owner of the distillery, Carlos de Aldecoa, he and his family are international coffee barons, like multi-generational. They control most of the coffee trade around the world. And he controls about 40% of the coffee in the U.S. market. So he's a billionaire with a B, right? So he's in a place, and he's a super cool dude. Like, you just hang out with him, you'd have no idea, all the success that he's had just by hanging out with him. And I have hilarious stories about when I first met him, and then later on realized like who this dude really was. And he was in a place where he's just like, yeah, let's have fun, right? So he told us, here's my attorney's info. Go pick a name, and don't do anything with it until the attorney says it's available, and I'll take care of the rest. And so we go on this mission to figure out what we're going to name our whiskey, Christopher and I. And I asked him, I said, because I have no design ability at all. Like, I'm not a designer. I'm not a creative person, right? I am a robot that can churn out somebody else's idea, but I can't come up with my own. And he's very creative. So I said, do you have a theme? And he's like, I want the logo to look like an old world Irish pub sign. Like, think of an Irish pub, like, And I said, okay. So I start doing all this research, and I come up with this idea. It's like, what if we made it Gaelic? And so I'm looking up all of these Gaelic words, and I figure out a name that we could come up with that's his last name and my last name in Gaelic. And it sounded kind of cool. And I knew for sure that it wasn't going to be taken, in terms of intellectual property. And so I pitched him on it, and he was like, that sounds really cool, Randy. But do you know what's going to happen when the whiskey enthusiast world realizes that we named this whiskey after ourselves? They're going to fucking crucify us. And I was like, you know what? You are right. And as soon as he said that, and he like crushed my idea, he goes, what about the Prideful Goat? And I go, what about you've been playing around on a hipster word generator? What are you talking about? The Prideful Goat. And I don't remember what I was doing it for, but I was coming up with the name for something else. And I found a hipster word generator, and you just hit a button and it like throws out hipster words. And the Prideful Goat sounded like something a hipster word generator would come up with. So I'm like, you were on a hipster word generator, weren't you? And he's like, no, man, it just came to me. I just thought of it. And still to this day, he claims he just thought of it. But I still kind of think he might have been on a hipster word generator. But I thought it was a cool sounding name, and the whole concept of like having a goat designed, you know? And so funny story, I didn't know who designed the goat, right? I knew who put our label together, but Christopher went to a designer to have just the goat made by itself, because this was going to be the centerpiece of the thing. And I was at a distillery event in Houston, and Christopher had to leave early. It was his kid's birthday party or something. And I'm standing there talking to this guy. Am I allowed to cuss, by the way?
All the time. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
No.
So we're standing there at the bar, and the bartender is letting this guy sample some of Christopher's other brand that he owns called Gregarious Rum. And he bottled a really funky Jamaican rum. And so the bartender's like giving a sample to this guy, and he gives me a sample, and I taste it. And the guy goes, "What do you think?" And I said, "It tastes like shit." And the guy looked at me like shocked. I'm like, no, I love it, but it's Jamaican Dunderpit rum. It's supposed to taste like shit, right? Like and he was so confused. And later I found out he was the designer of the goat.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And so that was kind of the origin story. But if you look at the goat, he's like giving you this side eye, and it's like, he looks prideful. Like, I don't know how you make a goat look like he's full of pride, but somehow this guy did it. He crushed it. So that's where the name came from, and that's where the goat came from.
That's super cool.
We just poured some of the 15 bourbon. Was that the right order?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let me get caught up.
Yeah.
Hold on.
No, you know,
take your time, man.
I love your stories. I love watching your show. So
good story.
And you know what? I think you are sort of creative. You say you're not creative. The reason is I was telling him the thing I like about your show versus other shows, and it's not to put them down, but you cover a wide array of topics that other people don't always tackle. It's always like just them tasting these whiskeys, which is fine, and those are good shows too. But you come up with all these different ways to go about it. You know what I mean? The most recent one where you bought whiskey, like 4 of them for $10 each, the cheapest thing you could find with the vanilla. That was hilarious. You know what I mean? But I mean, I go all the way. I can go back with you a few years with some of your stuff, and it's like you taught us about Bowman and the fact that it came from Blanton's and stuff like that, and you know, all these things that I didn't hear from other places necessarily. And that's you creating that. So that's a creative thing. Like, you come up with reasons to watch a show that's not just I tried this whiskey and this is my idea of what it tastes like.
Plus, I stay in my lane. Okay, I know my lane.
Fair enough.
I am a Christian, and many Christians believe that when you give your life to the Lord, he gives you a gift that is meant to edify people in general. And my gift was teaching. Full stop, no question, right? I used to be a junior high youth pastor and all that stuff. And now my ministry is whiskey, which surprises some Christians. But I was having a conversation with it's actually a real estate customer of mine, but she's a minister, and she was like, the Lord has a calling for you. He's calling you back into the ministry. And I looked at her and I said, how many people did you preach to on Sunday? And she said, about 250. And I said, well, on a slow day, I preach to about 5,000 7 days a week. On a slow day. On a busy day, 20,000. I'm reaching millions of people per year with my positive message of love and acceptance and community. And that's my ministry. And so even though I'm not up behind a pulpit, it doesn't mean that I'm not ministering to people, because I bring a message of positivity when people need it. And so we were having a meeting the other day, my leadership team for the Bourbon Real Talk community, which is our Facebook-based forum for the podcast. And there had been somebody that had said a bunch of
members.
Yeah. And somebody had said some ugly things about our community. And I was talking with the leadership team, and I said, you know, the only thing I'd ask that person is, how many suicides has he prevented? Because I don't know how many I have, but I know it's not zero.
Yeah, it's very true.
Yeah.
It's 100%
right?
1-0.
And so, because I get messages from people, that have come out of a dark space and told me that they credit, at least in part, my message of love for keeping them positive enough to look for a brighter day, right? And so it's a slippery slope, because people who are struggling, which is, in some ways my target audience. I mean, I don't want all struggling people. I want people who are also feeling strong and confident to come alongside and us work together as a family and a community and build each other up. But often people that are struggling abuse alcohol, right? And so it's an excellent bait to bring people in who are in that space that need to hear that message. But on the flip side, I feel obligation from time to time to do a podcast that's like, are we drinking too much? Right?
With the musical doctor guy about how much to drink is better, and that was really, and he has his own thing too, a charity or whatever.
Yeah. We raised
so
over
cool
$15,000 for his charity.
Very nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, late last year. So, it's about community and bringing people together. And sometimes people can't wrap their heads around it. They think whiskey's about getting drunk, and whiskey and alcohol in general. There's documentation of alcohol being used by humans in a communal society of 9,000 to 12,000 years
dawn
ago.
Of time, yeah.
And alcohol is a communal resource. It's not historically, individuals drinking alone has been shunned upon by almost all societies. It's meant to bring people together, and I think there's something.
People aren't going to like me because I drink alone quite a bit. My wife goes to bed at night and I just have a couple sips and I'm trying to smell and stuff, and I don't want outside interference.
That's a different thing.
Oh, my bad. Yeah.
No, and I do that too.
He has to keep me in line.
I do that too, in full disclosure, but there's also something different about pouring a drink to relax and getting on YouTube. And yeah, in some ways it's like you're interacting with the people that you're watching, even though it's not a back and forth. But I say all that to say, we can all use the connective power of the brown spirits to bring people together, but also have a positive message of responsibility, looking out for your health, being cautious about the potentials for alcohol abuse, right? So I try to do both, but I piss both sides off. Whenever I do it, the teetotalers get mad that I'm telling people about whiskey, and there are people who get mad that I'm, saying that it's probably not a good idea to drink 7 days a week, right? And they go, well, I drink 7 days a week and I'm fine, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I'm not telling anybody what they're supposed to do. My job is to put information out there. But to your original point, I don't watch anyone else's YouTube. And it's not because I don't enjoy it. It's because I'm so afraid that I'll plagiarize. So I have never been influenced by the average way that people make content. I only make the content that I would have wanted when I was trying to learn about that topic. And what I found is it's the if you build it, they will come kind of mentality. Like, my content's not for everybody. But there are people that are like-minded, that enjoy it. And my job is to find those people. And eventually it all kind of works out.
Yeah. I credit you a lot. Like when I say, so I learned, because I always feel like wherever I hear it, I'm very visual. I watch a lot of stuff to learn for shows. We haven't copied anything, but I always am like, I heard this from Randy at Bourbon Real Talk and I saw this. So I'm always like, or if I saw it somewhere else, something because of that. But I love watching them, but you're always kind of that one person that can pull me in with an episode because it's just random, but it's so different. It's so without you watching episodes of other shows, you do an incredible job of varying your content.
Well,
so I think that's great personally.
I spend a lot of time going to the main YouTube channels and sorting their videos by view count to see what topics people are interested in. And then I try to come up with an episode that will cover what I believe the subject matter was without watching the video. And that has been a pretty successful recipe for me to figure out what people want to learn about, but to also produce unique content, because I didn't consume anyone else's. But then sometimes people try to give me too much credit, and they're like, you know, you're so brilliant. And I'm like, nope, I'm just good at Googling stuff. There's nothing that I said in this video that you couldn't have figured out in 15 minutes with some good Google searching, right? So there's nothing special about it. I'm a good information aggregator. So, or maybe I shouldn't say that I'm good, but some people like the way I aggregate information.
I'd give you credit to being a good aggregator, because I mean, I watched the entire video of the whole Buffalo Trace thing that's going on with their, you know, not being able to find like suing their distributor and such. And
right.
There was so much information packed in that video.
That was an interesting one. That was my biggest success in terms of an initial release. You know, a lot of people don't know this, but when you release a YouTube video, you get statistics that start coming in, I think, after 15 minutes. And even after 15 minutes, you can kind of tell if it's going to be a stinker or a good one. And within 3 hours, you're pretty much, you know, the trajectory of where it's going. And this video was going, and I'm sitting there. I release videos on Friday morning, and my mom comes over. I have a handicapped uncle, and she comes over every Friday, and I help her give him a bath, because I'm the only one that can carry him and, you know, move him around. And so they come over every Friday. We usually watch the episode together, and I'm like freaking out. And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "I've never seen anything like this. Like, this video has, you know, 10 times the normal number of views in this amount of time. Like, I have no idea how far this is going to go, but this is crazy, you know?" Yeah. And it pissed a lot of people off, and I started getting a lot of feedback. But I'm the kind of person where if I'm wrong, tell me, you know? And there were some bits of information that I was not able to find by my Google searches that I was able to independently verify from multiple sources. And so I did a follow-up piece to that. And then Sazerac sued RNDC for non-payment of invoices. So I did a third video, and all were pretty successful. But the ironic thing is the opportunity to move the Prideful Goat into Alaska came because of that video. Because a VP of sales for a distributor in Alaska watched the video and reached out to me, PM, and was like, "Hey, I want to jump on the phone with you." And I get on the phone, and he's like, "I just really appreciate, you know, you taking the time to explain this to the public and all that stuff." And in the conversation, I brought up the Prideful Goat, and that conversation has progressed forward, and it looks like we may end up in Alaska. It's not a done deal yet, but it's getting close. So. Let's talk about this 15-year before before y'all drink it all. So this is our origin story, Bourbon. I kind of talked about how he had the totes. We released our first release. We released in Houston and Dallas, and it sold out in about 3 hours. Our second release, we released in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin, and it sold out in about 45 minutes. And then we doubled the size of the batch to 2 totes and released 2,600 bottles. And that sold out in Dallas in an hour, and in Houston it took a little bit longer.
Holy crap.
Like 3 days. And then
3 whole days. Oh.
Yeah. And then
no wonder we can't get things like
what you're drinking was not sold in Texas at all, except for at the
okay, cool.
This was distributed to California, Louisiana, and Florida. And unfortunately, the retailers there marked it up quite a bit. And so it hit the shelves for $1.99 in those markets, but we sold it at the distillery for $1.40.
When you're saying distillery, are you guys aging some of your own juice to get to that point? Or are you
not for the Prideful Goat yet? So the distillery has a column still that they bought from a major Kentucky distillery that decommissioned it. I'm not going to say the name because they've gotten a cease and desist before. Although that's one of the hilarious stories of Carlos, because this distillery sues a lot of people, but they're used to suing small, mom and pop shops that don't have the money. And that's not Carlos. If Carlos wanted, he could buy their distillery 10 times over tomorrow. And so he
oh, that's funny.
We're walking around and he's doing the private tour and he's like, and that's the such and such still. And I was like, hey, I heard a rumor that you got a cease and desist. And he was like, uh-huh. And I was like, and you're still telling everybody? And he goes, yeah, I told my attorneys to send him a letter to tell him to fuck off. And I was like, awesome.
That's
so
the kind of
that's incredible.
Up to him to tell people who it's from. I don't want to smoke, but yeah.
Fair,
so
that's fair.
Now he's got the column still, and he's got 3 different sizes of equipment for pot still distillation. He can do about 7,000 barrels a month, which is nothing compared to like a Heaven Hill or a Jack Daniels.
Right.
Jack Daniels is 2,200 a month. Heaven Hill 1,700 a month. Buffalo Trace was 1,200 a month, but now that they fired up the new still, it's 400 a month. I'm sorry, a day. Those are all per day. 2,400 a day, 2,200 a day, 1,700 a day. But for comparison, MGP is about 9,000 a month, and so 7,000 a month in west of the Mississippi. It's the largest distillery.
It's not nothing.
Wow.
But so far, none of the whiskey that he's producing is slated to go into the Prideful Goat because that's kind of not our market, right? Not that
the unallocated or no?
Do what?
Is it the unallocated? You're part of that too, right?
Yeah, so Unallocated is my other brand. It's basically a house brand for the whiskey club. Someone say whiskey, and that is we're partnered with Iron Root Republic Distillery out of.
I see Iron Root. I see bottles. Yeah, I see bottles of Iron Root around here in New York, upstate New York. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my Texas has 2 styles of whiskey. One would be pot still bourbon. Garrison Brothers is probably the most famous of that style. Iron Root is my favorite pot still bourbon from Texas. But there are some column still distilleries coming online. Still Austin has column still product. They sponsor the podcast. So if you're a Kentucky bourbon lover, your favorite whiskey for sure, without a question, is going to be Still Austin out of Texas. Your favorite whiskey out of Texas is going to be Still Austin. There's a chance that we could bottle Texas distillate that came off the column still in the future. But our goal is to not release anything that's less than 6 years old if it's a bourbon. So we're years away from that. Right now we're still trying to source, whiskeys, like I said, that we would want to drink. But this 15 year got a lot of accolades. Fred Minnick loved it. He used it at a blind 15-year tasting at Bourbon and Beyond, I think it was. And it beat the Knob Creek 15, which quite honestly surprised me.
Yeah.
And then the Calumet 15 and something else. I forget what the third 15-year-old was. And it ranked 27 in his top 100 last year. But the main
definitely got a richer, bolder flavor than the 6 year. You know what I mean? So in my opinion, that's but it's delicious. Is that what was the proof on this one? Did you say it?
It's not too oaky for 15 years. But you can taste the oak for sure.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Like that was my first thought, was like, normally once you get up into those 15 years, the age statements and things, you're going to taste a lot of wood, and sometimes it's overdone. Like I had a Kelma 16 and I was like, that's all wood. I didn't enjoy it much, but this, I was like, this is like the right balance of that. There's not, you can taste a little bit of like, it's older bourbon, but it's not just wood flavor.
What was the proof on that? I apologize. I'm listening to everything.
This one was 114.2.
Okay.
Yeah.
But day and night difference though. Like both good, but in different ways. This was a lighter, fruity, like citrusy almost hint of the 6, and then the 15's got that bolder, richer, like almost kind of dark fruit, which might be the char mellowing with. I don't know, but man, I
Well,
love the 15.
There's completely different congeners in these two whiskeys because the manufacturers, the producers were different. I'm not allowed to say which distillery produced the 15-year because we do have a NDA. But if you go Google it, there are 2 guesses and one of them are right. And honestly, the distillate doesn't taste like either one of the distilleries that people speculate it is. Because both of those distilleries are, they have a nuttier profile. And so I don't know if this whiskey used their regular yeast strain or if this was contract distilled for somebody else that had their own yeast. I really don't know. But this one tastes, I get a strong cherry component. And then some of the older, leather chocolate notes with a little bit of smoke. This one is, and I'm not saying it tastes like it because it doesn't. It's nowhere near as complex, but it's in the direction of like a George C. Stagg, like a higher aged Buffalo Trace mash, but one that's got that cherry note to it.
Yeah.
But GTS is far more complex. So don't anybody say that I was saying my whiskey's better than GTS because it's not. But it's in that direction. So
live exclusively, Bourbon Real Talk. Randy says he's better than Buffalo Trace. Never.
GTS is my favorite.
That's very good,
by the way. So I love a cherry forward whiskey. So
I just got to try my first Stag Junior.
Oh yeah,
a couple months ago.
Oh, up in Buffalo.
A couple weeks ago, up in Buffalo. Yeah,
that's awesome.
There's a nice little speakeasy in Buffalo that's they got a lot of real hard to find stuff and a lot of different stags and things, and that was one of the best things I'd had at that place.
I'm jealous. I have the wife and kids. He's single, so
have money to spend.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, you get to go do the per pour price at the expensive bar. Yeah, I've been blessed. I used to have a hookup for Stag Junior. It became very popular in Texas about a year, 2 years before it became popular in Kansas City. And I had a buddy, and every time he went to the store, he'd pick some up. So every year or so, we'd meet up, and he'd have 7, 8, 9 bottles of Stag Junior for me. And I loved it so much that I made it my daily drinker. But that source dried up, so now I've got to ration it out. You can see the whiskey wall behind me. I have a little over 600 bottles, and the Stag Junior, which you can see, it's right there. It's on an unrestricted shelf, so we do whiskey gatherings at the house about once a month through the Whiskey Club, Someone Said Whiskey. And when you come here, I give you a Bourbon Real Talk etched glass. I give you, we just ran out of these, but a Bourbon Real Talk lint-free rag and bottled water. And I tell everybody, you can drink anything you want on the wall, as much as you want. You can pour yourself, except for the top row. The top row I have to pour. Doesn't mean you can't have it, but I'm going to pour a very small amount for you to taste it because that stuff's irreplaceable. But Stag Junior is unrestricted, so some people come in here and hit that Stag bottle pretty hard. And the Blanton's that's behind me, the Blanton's gets a lot of love. Eagle Rare over there gets a lot of love, but we have a good time.
That's good. It sounds like fun if we weren't in New York.
I've had someone come from Canada before. I've had someone come from Hawaii. Those are the 2 farthest travelers, but they had other business in the area, so it wasn't just to come here.
That makes sense.
But I've had people drive, 4 or 5 hours to come to an event, and a few people come from Kentucky that flown in. But yeah, I mean, it's fun. You guys are welcome if you ever want to come. If y'all come to Texas, we'll just do a private tasting. It'll just be us. So
That'd be cool.
So that's awesome. Yeah.
What, to pick your brain a little bit, like I told him I was gonna ask you questions like, instead of just the big guy with all the companies and everything you do, like, are you still the guy like we are maybe when you're younger and you're starting off, where suppose you have to go an hour away for some meeting for something, and do you just still get excited to stop at a liquor store you haven't seen before? And if so, are there bottles that even you are like, oh, I would love to find another one of those, and or I haven't had, or you know what I mean? Do you still have that? Is that still,
I don't hunt like I used to,
Right.
just because I just don't have the time. But when I do find, like, a great example is a Weller 12. Weller 12 is not for my palate. I don't love it. But I know how special it is to people. And it's Weller 12 and Blanton's are bottles that I've raised a lot of money for charities with. And I still get giddy like a schoolgirl when I find one, right? Which is silly.
Okay, cool.
But, I mean, last year I got, I guess year before last, I was with my wife, and we had released one of the drops of the 15-year Prideful Goat through one of the largest retailers in Texas, which is called Specs. And we had a lot of people that were part of that pick team, and we reserve bottles for those people to make sure that the store doesn't sell them out before they release to the general public. I go in and buy everyone's reserve bottles. So I swiped my card for like $14,000 or $15,000. And it didn't dawn on me that it was going to give me Specs points, right? Now all of a sudden I got the points of like a large, like not a large, but like a bar, right? Like I have tons of points. So at the end of the year, I'm with my wife, and I get a phone call, and they were like, we have a reserve bottle for you of Saz 18 and Old Rip Van Winkle. And I was like,
wow, nice.
I'll take the Saz 18. And he goes, you don't want the Old Rip? And I was like, I can have both? And he's like, yeah, both are reserved for you. And this place is about 45 minutes from where I live, but I happen to be like 10 minutes away. And I was like, can I come right now? And he's like, sure. And I was like, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I hang up the phone, and I'm like,
it's perfect.
It was at a house that I was flipping, and I had some contractors that were there, and my wife was there. And I'm like jumping up and down in the garage. I'm like, you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this. My wife's like, what's going on? I was like, I just got a Saz 18. I was like, I don't even know that I know anyone who owns a Saz 18. And she was like, oh, that's so great. So we go, I pick up both the bottles, but there was like this weird like flash, like just a real quick flash in her eyes. And I was like, huh, that's weird. And on Christmas Day, I opened up a Saz 18 from her. And she had found me a Saz 18 knowing that I'd never owned one. And so when I got a second one, she was excited for me, but she was also like, this kind of takes the wind out of my sails a little bit. And then later I found out that they gave her the option of a Saz 18 or a Pappy 15. And she knew that I had a Pappy 15 before, but I'd never had a Saz, so she picked the Saz. And I was like, dang, if you'd got the Pappy 15, that would have made the collection pretty dope. But now I look over it, so I don't worry too much about giving somebody a pour of that, because
you're probably happy you're not drinking her brother's Bond, right? As long as you don't drink that, We still haven't tried that. They have cask strength up here now, but we just haven't gotten to it. So
it's shockingly good. Like it's actually even the 80 proof version is got way more flavor than almost all 80 proofs I've tasted. But it is a 4-grain, so But yeah, she she's forbade me from drinking her brother's Bond. She wants to save that for special occasions. So
yeah, your celebrity whiskey show was a good one. That you had ones on there I'd never seen anywhere. I didn't even know some of those people had one. So
yeah, I crowdsourced it from the community. and came up with a pretty good list. And there were a few that got left off. A lot of people complained that I didn't have the ZZ Top whiskey from Balcones and whatnot, but it's like, well, I did the best I could. It wasn't in the list, so.
Everybody,
and I eliminated some that were like not bourbons. So anyway,
understood.
Right. What's your? There's a funny line that you have, and it's been a long time since you said it, I think, or that I've heard it. You have some word you describe like Scotch and like Canadian whiskey. One tastes like something, and the other one tastes like regret or something. I remember this from a long time ago, and I can't remember, but I remember it was so funny.
Yeah. So the story was I go to a joint birthday party with one of my high school best friends, and a third guy that was like, there was a crew of us and we all hung out together. A third guy had started dating this much older, recently divorcee. And she looked down on the whole crew, right? She thought like our whole vibe was annoying. So she gets invited with him to this birthday party, and she comes in and gives us both a plastic bottle of like Canadian Club. And she's like, I know you guys love bourbon, so I went to the store and I got you this. Now, I'm thinking to myself, there's no scenario where she walked into the store and said, I'm going to two guys' birthday parties that are major bourbon lovers. And they go, oh, you got to get this Canadian Club in a plastic bottle. It felt like a snub. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I opened it and I tasted it, and it tasted fine. Right. It was decent Canadian blended whiskey. You could tell that it had some, flavoring added and whatnot. It tasted fine. But I didn't like the bottle being in my house. And back then I didn't drink as frequently as I do now. And so it's like the third night in a row that I'm drinking because I'm trying to get rid of it in my house. And I'm a little bit buzzed. And I'm sitting and I'm looking at the bottle and I'm feeling resentfulness towards this bottle of, like, I'm angry at the bottle, right? And I pick up my phone and I text our group of friends that were all at the party, including the other guy that got the other bottle. And in my slightly inebriated state, I typed, I don't drink Canadian whiskey because it tastes like poverty. And I don't drink Scotch because it tastes like treason. And
treason. I thought it was trees. That's
no, because I had learned that during Prohibition, we got shut down in the United States for making whiskey during Prohibition. So right as the whiskey industry is recovering, the federal government has to take over all of the distillation in the U.S. to provide materials for the war effort in World War II. And we were making enough grain neutral spirit for the rubber industry and the gunpowder industry that we could supply the Allied forces. And England's just getting the shit bombed out of them because they're within flying range of Germany and they need tax dollars. And so they're funneling their grains into the distilleries in Scotland to make whiskey because they can tax it. And I know that in the United States, our grains were being funneled to feed the Allied forces, including British troops. And so our distilleries got, set on the back burner during the World War II effort. And when we came out of the war, Scotland had taken over so much market share. And then they used all of these marketing dollars to advertise worldwide that, like, if you drink Scotch, you're like a sophisticated gentleman. But if you drink bourbon, you're a hobo, right? And so that kind of turned me a little bit against the idea of, like, if you're a real American, you drink American spirits, baby. Don't, and great, I love Scotch. I have a bunch of bottles of Scotch. I respect Scotch and all that. But in my slightly inebriated state, I realized the reason why I was feeling resentful towards the bottle was because I did grow up poor and I couldn't pour it out, right? Like, I couldn't bring myself to waste it, but I didn't want it in the house. So I was drinking it faster than I wanted to. And that made me feel like I was poor, right? Like, if you had more resources, you would just give this bottle away or you pour it out. But But because of your mental state, you can't do it. Now you're going to drink this whiskey you don't want to drink. And it was making me feel poor. And then every time I drink scotch, I feel like I'm being disloyal to the American people. And so I was like, yeah, this one tastes like poverty and this one tastes like treason. But now we got a lot of viewers in Canada. And when they see that stuff, it pisses them off. And I do not mean it that way. I respect Canadian whiskey.
That's fair. That's fair.
And I love Alberta rye. So, so yeah. That's the story between
that's so funny. That is so good. I knew I'd heard it and I'd forgotten. It's been a while since I heard that one, but that's good.
So segue into things that aren't bourbon.
No, right, yeah, rise. Hey, you know what? That goes into rise good because we're going with the 6-year rye and then the single barrel, right? Yeah.
Cask strength, which is 115. It looks like.
Yeah, this one's 115. This was batch 2.
Read that from here. Jesus.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, there you go.
115.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, I thought he had it. I was kind of looking down. I thought he still had it over here, and I was like, "You saw the
2015 vision?
Holy crap, dude. Jesus, superhero."
Yeah,
it's definitely got a different nose.
So this one is a 95% rye from MGP. Also 6-year aged. This was about a 40-barrel blend. So it's a pretty decent sized blend for us.
Yeah.
And the first thing we did when we got this batch of barrels, we tasted through all of them and pulled the ones out that had unique character. And so what's left is kind of an average profile barrel. And then when you dump 40 of them together, you get a lot of consistency in your batches, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
So a lot of people make a real big deal about like blending, but if all of the barrels that you have as an NDP are all from one distillation run, and you pull out all the ones that aren't the average flavor, it's pretty easy to produce a consistent product. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do it. But yeah, so
all right.
This has been a pretty successful product for us. This one's interesting because there is a note that I think that it might be a genetic mishap that causes some people to get it and some people not to get it. And for me, this whiskey smells and tastes like Big League Chew bubblegum.
Wow.
Interesting.
Oh, I never thought of it till you said it, but it does have that. I was trying to piece together that sort of aftertaste that I was getting, and it's been a long time since I had Big League Chew bubblegum. So yeah, so
I did a tasting event in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I put the word out to the podcast viewers, and there's about it's 5:30 in the afternoon on like a Wednesday or Thursday. There's 17 people there. And we're all tasting the whiskey together and we're talking. And I say that I get this bubblegum note. And there were a bunch of dudes that are like, I do not know what you're talking about. I do not get that at all. And then it was like, there was a sign up that says like, this is a private event. And some like kind of pushy guy comes walking in and he's like, what are y'all doing in here? And I'm like, Prideful Goat, tasting whiskey. I'm like, do you want to pour? And he's like, yeah, sure. So I give him a pour. And he hadn't been there for the previous conversation. And he takes a sip and he's like, this tastes like bubble gum. And I was like, I told all y'all. I high-fived the guy, but I don't know why. But for some people, that's what they taste. And other people's, they get something else. I get a little bit of orange zest on this. There's a little bit of a citrus component to it. But again, very complex whiskey. There's a lot of congeners in this.
There's a lot going on here. Yeah,
it's not abrasive at all.
I get a good
bit of 95% rye because a lot of those ryes are 51 just to make them rise, Pikesvilles and Elijah Craig's and such.
The thing I find with ryes is if it's not done right, you're just tasting grain. Like that's and that's not this at all.
Yeah,
like
right.
No.
I just keep pouring it, so I mean, that's not a bad sign in my eyes. So, I don't know.
And I don't get any dill on this one. And I do sometimes get dill on MGP rye, but I don't get any dill. I do get spearmint though. And that comes out pretty heavily on the finish.
Okay.
Little more Christmas flavor in this one.
Yeah.
Tasty. These are all
Yes, these are all very good.
They're right along the same lines of proof too, like
Mhm.
14, 14, 15, you know what I mean? Like, so there's
Yeah.
none of that harsh over burn feel that chemical ethanol kind of is nose or tasting. It's all very well done. You know, whatever, you know.
And
Are
that's
there
from
new things in the
sourcing.
future coming from you?
Yeah. So the whiskey that you're drinking right now, I have that same whiskey in finishing barrels, in rum finishing barrels. And
Oh,
so
nice.
we're guessing because rum finish, you're usually 3 to 6 months in the finishing barrel. They went in January, so we're guessing probably third quarter. We'll release a rum finish version of this, but it could be fourth quarter depending on how quickly it picks up the flavors we're looking for. But even that's an interesting problem, because when you go to source rum barrels, I mean, the rum's wild west of spirits. Like, there's a lot of different flavor profiles you can create using the various manufacturing methods and still be considered a rum. And so I ended up sourcing barrels from I think 4 or 5 different areas, so that if any one source of barrel produced something that wasn't stellar, we didn't ruin the whiskey.
Nice.
We could still probably blend it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting process that you don't really think about until you go to do it yourself, and you're like, do you have rum barrels? And they're like, yes. And you're like, where are they from? And they're like, Jamaica. And I'm like, no.
That's fair. Yeah, no, our friend Jesse, who's the master blender at Doc Swinson, they released this last year in 2022. What was it? The one, it's the drummer boy.
Little drummer.
He has like these Jamaican funk barrels that he does. I don't have a bottle of it because it's hard to get, but
we just did a pick with them.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we went
beautiful.
up there.
Cool. Hi, Jesse.
Yeah, we went up there and picked a muscatel finish barrel. I didn't go on the trip. I was supposed to, but I had a conflict in my schedule and I couldn't go. But yeah, big fan of Doc Swinson's, and Doc Swinson's got their start the same way the Prideful Goat did. They bought some of the same 15-year juice, and that's what caused the big splash of them coming onto the market, was those 15-year barrels. So and we weren't the only ones that released it either. You commented on the proof point being around 115. Old Soul out of Missouri, they also released some of this liquid, and it was supposed to be cask strength, and theirs was 101 proof. Ooh. And so I don't know whether some of the barrels were really low in the rick house. Because from a physics standpoint, if you've got a rick house that's tall enough, at the top those barrels evaporate water, which is heavier than atmospheric air, and it settles down to the bottom of the warehouse, and barrels are thirsty, and so it'll drink the water up from the barrels at the top, and the barrels up top lose proof, and the barrels at the bottom, or the barrels up top gain proof, and the barrels at the bottom lose proof. And so I don't know if their totes that they bought happened to be dumps of barrels that were lower. But we've seen proofs all over the place on this, but most, if not all of them, and we don't know what the original barrel entry proof was either. But most, if not all of them, appear to have had a drop in proof if this distillery barreled these barrels at the same proof that they do for their regular line products, which we also don't know for sure if that's true. So
cool.
A lot of guesswork.
Cool. Yeah, man. Information. It's just like watching your show. You have to watch things a couple times because you pack so much in that I can't keep it all in. So
yeah, imagine being my producer.
Tentacles. No,
imagine being
I
my producer and having to edit out all of my flub ups. It's Wes needs to win some sort of a producer award. So, in fact, the
I
funny
almost
thing
sent
is,
you a smaller shirt so you could say, "Oh, nice extra medium shirt," like when
yeah.
you like, you know what I mean? But because I love that stuff, it's so funny,
Oh,
man. You guys are
and
hilarious.
Wes is very creative, and the backstory on that was he said I need an example of every product because I'm going to do some professional photography of all the products and use it as B-roll in our videos. And I said, oh, okay. So Lindsay goes and she gets one of everything and she puts it in this box. And Wes has a daughter who's a model, and Lindsay assumed that Wes would be behind the camera. And so she didn't send shirts that would fit Wes. She sent shirts that would fit his daughter. And Wes and I did not know that. Wes lives an hour and a half away. So I drive all the way to Wes's ranch so that we can film that day. And one of the things we were going to film was this new commercial. And we go to get the stuff out. And he's like, these shirts are like really small. And I was like, yeah, they're for your daughter to wear when you do the photos. And he's like, well, what do we do? Like, we need the shirts for the photos. And I was like, let's just put them on. And so we both put the shirts on. And of course, we both look like stuffed sausages. And he goes,
so good. It's so good.
We were doing like a couple of takes. And I said, schmedium, because I put on a bunch of muscle a few years ago when I got on testosterone. But my shirts didn't grow with me. So now I have all these shirts that are really tight. And people started making fun of my tight shirts and saying like, oh, is that shirt a schmedium? And I liked it. So I brought it up in the while we were filming. And so Wes threw it in the next take where he called my shirt a schmedium. And so then it was just a couple of weeks ago, we were filming a new commercial. And he came up with the idea of integrating that at the end of the commercial to make it comedic. And we had to do a couple of takes. But if you watch the video of the commercial for Still Austin, there's a point at which I snap my fingers and smoke goes everywhere. When the camera comes back into focus, my wrong hand is up in the air. Like I snapped right-handed instead of left-handed.
Oh.
And so Wes didn't want that to happen again. And so when we got to the part where he's like, is it extra schmedium? And he snaps his fingers, he made me stand in the exact same position while he took his hoodie off. And then he got back in the same position so that we didn't have to use the smoke. Like the camera cuts and it looks like neither one of us moved. And he's wearing the super tight shirt. And so we've had some good fun with that. People think that's pretty fun.
Hilarious.
Outstanding.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah, man, you guys are funny.
That's
you guys
fun.
are funny. So that last one when you guys did with the cheap stuff, that was hilarious. That was just hilarious. Like the vanilla whatever, and you're like, yep, there it is. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that one was going to stick out like a sore thumb. Wes took that bottle home. He's like, I like it. And I'm like, dude, you can have it. Like it didn't taste bad. It's just like, when am I going to drink this? Right. Like,
right.
I told him, you make a good point with those. It doesn't matter. That was a fun show. But even at the end, you're like, Kentucky distilleries don't put out garbage. You know what I mean?
Right.
These are good things. Like, there's always, it's funny. And then there's facts and it's not, it's a great job. It's fun to watch every time. So
I appreciate that.
And informative. So it's always informative. So now the single barrel 6-year rye.
Are ready for the single barrel?
I believe so.
All right.
I mean, we'll just keep drinking all of them anyway. I'm the bourbon dumpster. I just drink all the crap. I would have taken home the vanilla stuff. So
this is a single barrel. And so it's got a tater sticker. Very interesting backstory. So my most popular video I've ever done was with Dwayne Poor, his $7 million whiskey collection.
Yes.
And he ended up launching a whiskey club that it's like a whiskey country club kind of called Bourbon Heads, and its access is controlled by an NFT. And so when they mint the NFTs, they made all of these, I don't know what they're called, like avatars, and they look kind of like this goat does, where they're holding up a bottle of whiskey. And the rarer the bottle of whiskey, the more desirable the avatar is, right? And so
this is his area.
I was able to pick my avatars first because I referred the most people to the club from my podcast. And so I got Pappy 25 and OFC, which are both whiskeys that I've drank before. I picked ones that I drank. I could have got the Double Eagle Very Rare, but I haven't tried that yet, so I didn't pick it. And we had launched the Prideful Goat in Oklahoma, and we have an amazing wholesaler there. Love those guys. And I came in town for a market visit. Is what they call it, and you do a ride along with the sales rep, and the sales rep takes you to all of these different accounts that they service, and you go in and you meet the decision maker and you taste your whiskey with them, and it helps solidify the relationship and makes them want to order more in the future and all that stuff. And that's how you grow a brand. Well, one of the stores that he took me to wanted to do a single barrel, and I was able to get some samples, and we taste through them, and I'm letting him taste them by himself because I'm not trying to influence anything. And he's like, "Man, taste this." And I'm like, "All right." So I get it and I taste it, and I'm like, this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite barrel I've ever tasted of the Prideful Goat Rye. Like, full stop. Like, I love this barrel. And he's like, "I love it too." Well, he ends up picking 2 barrels, and he gave the second one to Bourbon Heads, which is out of the same city. It's all Oklahoma City. I didn't know that he had given away the second barrel. And I'm a member of Bourbon Heads, and I get an email that says that their first barrel pick is going to be the Prideful Goat. And I had not given them a barrel. So I was very confused. So I call my business partner, and I'm like, "Hey, did you give Bourbon Heads a barrel?" And he's like, "Nope." And so I start calling around, and I figure out that the liquor store had allowed, this other barrel to go to them. And so I was pretty excited because I was going to be guaranteed access to get a bottle of my whiskey that was my favorite barrel that we've released. So that's why I wanted to send you guys this one, because this is an exceptional, expression of my brand. It's just
oh wow, yeah. Like, there's an effervescence that's like, it's pleasant in ways that I'm not necessarily used to nosing pleasant. It's got, I don't know what, it makes my nose happy. My nose is usually like, okay,
it's put it in your mouth. It'll make that happy.
I plan to. That's the next move. That's the next move for
it's
sure.
Kind of like this real creamy vanilla ice cream finish.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
wonderful.
Super weird for a rye. Like, I would not expect this out of a rye.
I would not. If I had to pick this out of a hat and call it a rye, I wouldn't call it a rye.
No.
I would have thought this was a bourbon, to be honest. But it's 95% rye, and it tastes like this.
Wow. So
that's
good.
I'm a huge fan of this barrel, so that's why I wanted to send it. But the tater sticker is a Prideful Goat, but in the design flair of the avatars for the Bourbon Heads, like NFTs.
Cool.
And so it's even fake pixelated, the way that the avatars are. And so when I saw this, guys, I was like, yeah, I was so excited, And I showed it to my wife, Lindsay, and she was like, "What? How?" And I'm like, I'm living the life. I don't know. I'm just lucky. I don't know.
Very nice.
Now, is this also right around 115? Did we catch that or no? I didn't.
All of them are pretty close to that. This one's 114.8.
Okay.
Yeah,
wow, that's
I would not peg that as a rye at all.
This could literally be an episode of us blinding these and doing our favorite blinds. You know what I mean? And
I wouldn't
pick. Well, I know, but a lot of times we're not able to pick, but we do. It's like, okay, if I have to push a button, I'm going to say, none of them are bad. None of them, not even close. But they're, this one I prefer more than you. we did a thing where we called it a championship thing where I said that Eagle Rare was my favorite back when we started this, and he said E.H. Taylor, and we were sipping it. Then we blinded it, both of them, a few months later, and he picked Eagle Rare, and I picked E.H. Taylor. So like, it's just so much fun. There's so many, like, I don't know. There's just so much. So much.
That's hilarious.
But luckily, we have people like you to help bring us in and understand what the hell's going on sometimes. So
we know every YouTuber that does reviews is just full of shit. Like that's the and I say that being
that is the most accurate thing that has ever been said.
Who does reviews? I do them because people want to see them. But the truth, the matter is that I can do the same blind the next day and I pick different. Right? I mean, everyone asks me what's my favorite whiskey, and I say George T. Stagg. I've had George T. Stagg in a blind with William LaRue Weller before, and I picked the William LaRue Weller that day. Right? And the reverse has happened. So your palate changes every day. What you taste in a really complex whiskey is going to be affected by what you ate earlier, your mood. Are you in a fight with your spouse? Like everything affects it. And so that's why I try not to, put too much emphasis on my tasting notes or whatnot. Like I'll tell you what I think the overall notes are. But I try not to get like too deep into the woods of, this tastes like the tears of a Bolivian, no, not Bolivian, a Ukrainian virgin, and it's like, guys, you
just named this episode Ukrainian Virgin with Randy Sullivan from
I'm like, I don't want to say a bunch of stuff that people don't have a reference point for, and so I try to keep it to the very basics. What's the fruit component? How much is it vanilla, caramel, toffee, or butterscotch, right? Like you're going to get that in any product that's aged in a Nuchardo container. So, which one is it? And some of them are more toffee because they're smokier and it's more of a burnt flavor. Some of them are more just vanilla. This one to me happens to taste like vanilla ice cream on the finish. It's like a cream flavor. So
it's a very
question I was going to ask. I mentioned to you earlier was about with all the stuff you do. I haven't heard this that I recall. Do you have a lot of takes on the different bottles as far as the ones that are different colors or have a full wrap, so therefore the oxygen? You know what I mean? Because obviously a lot of scotches are in boxes, but we get a lot of random. You sent us bottles that are brown, for instance, and other people have sent us ones that are clear. And a lot of, the James E. Pepper 1776 is a darker colored bottle. There's a lot of those. Just what's your take with all the knowledge you have on whether or not that does or doesn't do anything to whatever?
This is not a take. This is science. And
cool.
And anyone in YouTube world that wants to dispute this can catch these hands. Okay.
Nice. I don't think they want to.
So. Whiskey is not affected by oxygen. Period. There are no compounds left in whiskey after it passes a still that can chemically react with an oxygen molecule. Okay? Now, that does not mean that whiskey does not change, because it does. But it's not because it's chemically reacting with oxygen the way that wine does. Okay? Wine is extremely reactive with oxygen. In fact, 20 minutes can change a wine, right? 2 days, completely different wine, could be ruined. Few days, vinegar. That doesn't happen with oxygen, with whiskey. And that's because there are different compounds in whiskey than there are in wine. So what does cause it to change? If you took a glass that had a little less than this in it, say it was down here, and you didn't finish it, and you left it overnight, and you came back in the morning, what do you find? All the sediment is fallen out of it, and the sediment's at the bottom, and it smells terrible. And that's because ethanol is an extremely volatile compound, and it wants to evaporate. It's also roughly 4 times the size of a water molecule. Okay, so even though it's more evaporative than water is, it can't make its way out of the barrel very easily. So that's why barrels tend to lose proof with age, because both the water and the ethanol want to evaporate and they want to escape the barrel, but the ethanol is too big to make it through the pores and the water's not. It's probably making it through the seams, but we don't need to get into all that. So the question is, what is changing it? Whiskey, so this bottle right here is a 1938 Four Roses. I took that bottle to Four Roses. I donated an unopened version of it that was in a box.
I saw it. You found it in California. Somebody had something in a basement or something they found.
It was underneath the floorboards of the house that was being demoed. And
I remember that one.
I donated one of those bottles, and it's now on display at Four Roses Visitor Center. But I drank that bottle with Brent Elliott and the head of the sensory lab. And they said, hey, can we take a sample and test it? So they ran it through their proofing machine, and it went from 90 proof to 63 proof. 63 proof in 90 years, roughly. So if you change the proof of a whiskey, you're going to change the flavor, but you're also changing the chemical environment that everything is in. So if you change the ethanol level, there might be some chemical reactions that were held in suspense by the high ethanol level that are now able to happen because the ethanol levels went down. All kinds of things can change. And there's another theory that the CO2 in the air can dissolve into whiskey and change its pH level as well. And so one of the things that I find remarkable is if you take a 1980 Wild Turkey and a 1980 Jim Beam and a 1980 Old Fitzgerald, and you pour a sample of all of them, they will taste different, but they will all have a leather flavor to them. Is that because all whiskey in 1980 had a leather flavor to it? Or is it because a flavor that develops in a very old bottle of whiskey, regardless of who the producer is a leather component? It's the latter. And so all really dusty whiskeys have a musty, dank, leathery kind of graphite flavor that starts to develop in them, regardless of who the producer was. And I think that change is from dissolved CO2, reduced ethanol levels, and the most important thing, and the thing that changes whiskey the fastest, is exposure to UV light. Which is why all bourbon should be in amber bottles. Because the amber bottles will filter out the UV light. But almost all bourbon comes in clear bottles. And the reason why is because this bottle is used by the Prideful Goat, but this bottle is also used by a bunch of other brands. Okay.
It looks like a Weller bottle to me.
So I'll show you this. Okay. This is my other brand, Unallocated. Yep. Okay.
That looks like an E.H. Taylor bottle. Yes.
There's E.H. Taylor.
Nope.
Here's Still Austin. Right? I can do this all day. Actually, it's a little bit different. Hold on. What's the other one? I've got like 5 different whiskeys that are in that same bottle. And the reason why is because custom production of glass is extremely
expensive. Yep.
And it puts you at risk.
Right?
Yeah. The mold to make your own whiskey bottle is like $40,000 or $50,000 just for the mold. And then only one producer has it. And what happens if your glass producer is in Ukraine and Russia invades? Right. All of a sudden, the U.S. bourbon market has a glass shortage, which is what happened. And so if you're a producer, it's better to go with a commercially produced glass. But if you're a commercial glass producer, you don't want to get off in all these weird colors that the consumer's not used to, because it makes your market smaller for people who are going to buy. And so the smartest thing, if you have a whiskey that you think people are going to keep for a very long time, would be to have an amber bottle. But very few companies do it. So the biggest enemy, people ask me all the time, how long can a bottle of whiskey be open? Forever. It won't taste the same, but it also won't hurt you. unless it's like a decanter that had lead paint or something. You have to be careful with lead. Yeah. But if you had a bottle of whiskey that's been, I found a bottle of whiskey that had been open since like 1983, and it had like just an ounce and a half, 2 ounces in it. It was fine, right? Mm-hmm. Did it taste the same as the day that it was opened in 1983? No, I'm sure it didn't. But it's fine. It's not going to hurt you. And so I don't worry about it. I have over 600 bottles. At least 300 of them are open. You know, some of my bottles have been open for 5-6 years. They're fine. They've changed, but it's okay. But your big enemy is UV light. So I would not be putting any bottles on display in a windowsill.
Enough. That makes enough.
It makes it taste dusty fast because I've experienced it. Well, and one quick caveat for any chemist that watches this: the chemical reaction that happens when UV light hits whiskey does require oxygen. Mm-hmm. So the whiskey and oxygen by itself won't do anything, but whiskey, oxygen, and UV light will do a thing. From what how it's been explained to me by chemists. So, but because there's always the bottle breathes. Even if it's corked, it can still breathe. And so there's always oxygen available. So if your whiskey's being hit by UV light, it's going to affect it faster than anything else.
Awesome.
For sure. Well, I feel bad. If this wasn't the interview set, like, bring up a topic and I'll try to be funny. I don't know.
No. You've been an absolute delight.
Really disappointed in any way, shape, or form. Not at all.
Yeah, say some funny stuff, and then we'll edit all the dumb stuff out. It'll be great.
No, because none of it's dumb. It's so like you just blow my mind half the time. Every time I'm watching something, it's like I didn't understand. Like, so is there a difference in the corks? Is it that we get the corks, we get the screw tops, we get the corks that are not wood?
Synthetic.
See,
synthetics.
That's where he comes. He's back. Yeah, like
I found because I've opened a bunch of dusty whiskeys, I've found that generally speaking, the screw tops held up better than the corks. And but not always. Like my birth year bottle that's over there, you can barely see it on the side of the screen. It looks like an I Dream of Jeannie gold bottle. That's a 78 Jim Beam. It fell apart. I mean, it's all leather and dirt, and there's very little fruit flavor left because the fruity congeners that are in there, the esters and things like that, they can evaporate, over time. And then what gets left is whatever that thing is that makes it taste like leather and graphite and whatnot. So it's an interesting conversation, but I don't know that the research I don't think has been done on it yet for whiskey anyways. They've done it for wines and they've discovered that screw tops are way better. So I can't imagine that it wouldn't be the same thing for whiskey.
It just makes sense to me that because screw tops are a newer technology than corks. Like they had corks in the 1700s, they didn't have the ability to screw top bottles.
Yeah, and another interesting conversation is, can a whiskey get corked? Right, because wine can be infected by this bacteria that lives in the cork tree. And I've tasted a whiskey that tasted corked. I've tried 2 of them actually in my lifetime. But I don't believe that it's the actual bacteria that affects wine. But there's something that can happen to whiskey that just this one bottle in this entire production run just tastes like wet cardboard. Right? Like musty, wet cardboard. And you get the bottle that was next to it, it was fine. And I've put in one in particular where we had one. My buddy reached out to the distillery because he knew the head distiller. They sent a replacement bottle, and you can taste them side by side, and they're totally different, right? And he's like, "This whiskey's corked," and I'm like, "Physically, I don't know how that's possible, but there's something that's happening." Right?
All right, that's fair. Fair enough.
but we use synthetic.
Oh wait, I have a joke for you. This is the only
Okay.
bottle of Texas whiskey I ever bought, and it's still unopened. Is this any good? Well, sort of a joke.
It's not one that I frequent.
I didn't assume.
Down at the bottom, read that thing at the bottom where the blue is.
Bourbon whiskey with a natural agave.
Yeah.
So it's like tequila.
I'm the guy who, when I see something I've never seen, I read the label now because I've learned by watching you and other, but like I read the label if it says grain alcohol and weird things that don't make sense, or, I'm fumbling with my words, but this one I had just never seen it. An agave bourbon, it still had the word bourbon on it, which I know you can use as long as you put the right things on it afterwards, like what you did with it afterwards. You have to, all that stuff. So I just thought it was the only thing I could bring with me that I had from Texas, because we don't have a lot of things up here on the shelves routinely that are Texas whiskeys or bourbons. So it's unopened. I figured it would kind of be a joke. Yeah. I didn't really assume. None of us, I've had it for like 6 months. Neither one of us have been like, let's try that. Like, no.
All right. Well, here's the thing with stuff like that. It's like that vanilla whiskey that I had on the podcast. If you tasted it, it's going to taste good, right? It's going to be sweet. Right. Because if they say that it's bourbon with agave, that means they made it legally bourbon, which means they followed all the rules, no more than 160, when the barrel no more than 125, an aged in a new charred oak container. And then they took it out and they added agave, which I don't know how much y'all use agave up in New York, but in Texas, we use it all the time because, I mean, well, it's not really Mexican food. We call it Tex-Mex, but we eat Tex-Mex in my house probably 4 or 5 times a week, right? Nice. When you make margaritas, you make it with agave if you want to make it legit. And agave is something akin to, it's something between honey and like a simple syrup. It's a little more viscous than a simple syrup, but not quite as thick as honey. So yeah, if you put a sweetener in a bourbon, is it going to taste good? Sure. But is it going to taste like a traditional Kentucky bourbon? No. Is the calorie load going to be what you're expecting from a distilled spirit? No, because it's got sugar.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. If they add sweetener and it goes under 80, can they still put bourbon because it was 80 bourbon? Because this is 80, but still. So it's still, you know what I mean? It hits that mark. But if they were to knock it, because most of those peanut butter vanilla whiskey things are 65, 70 proof, so they don't hit that 80 bourbon, or is it 80 bottled and bond? I apologize. You know what I mean? Like those rules and stipulations.
Whiskey is 80. Whiskey, the category whiskey is 80 in general in the United States. Like New Zealand, it's 70, but in the US and Scotland, it's 80. But once you go into that class 641, it could be anything. It's like you're allowed to say what it was before you adulterated it. So if it was bourbon before you started adding stuff to it, you can say this is bourbon with, or this is bourbon finished in, or whatever. But in terms of like it's not even whiskey anymore. It's more like a cordial, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Cool.
From
I can think of one other thing I thought to ask you from Texas. I remember seeing something somewhere where I think it was Balcones, and I might even be pronouncing that incorrectly, that uses smaller barrels because of the humidity in Texas sometimes, or maybe all the time, maybe sometimes. Is there a lot of that going on in Texas? Do you have anything to do with any of that as far as not the 53, 55 normal size gallon barrels?
So it's the opposite of what you said. So Balcones has switched to a 60 or a 63 gallon barrel, because the smaller the barrel, the greater surface area contact between the whiskey and the wood. And there is a process called esterification where the amyl acids that are produced during fermentation combine with alcohols to make esters that are flavor compounds, and a lot of our fruity flavors come from that. So like amyl acids will combine and make isoamyl acetate, which tastes like banana or pear in a whiskey. Butyric acid will combine and become isobutyl acetate, which tastes like pineapple. So you want to give the whiskey the time for those chemical reactions to take place, because you can't rush those, right? That part takes time. There's nothing you can do to speed it up. But you can speed up the extraction of compounds from the wood by putting it in a hotter aging environment, or by reducing the size of your barrel because the percentage of contact is greater. So Garrison Brothers, when they first launched,
it was Garrison Brothers, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were getting started while we were coming out of the housing crisis from 2007. And when there is a housing crisis, there's less demand for construction lumber. And a lot of people don't realize that when we harvest trees, we don't just go harvest the oaks. We are harvesting all of the construction lumber and the oaks for barrels and the walnut for cabinets and everything else that's in that field. And so if the majority of the lumber is not commercially viable, right, then they don't harvest the oaks, because it just doesn't, you'd lose money going in there, which means that the whiskey industry can be killing it and need barrels like crazy. But if the housing industry isn't killing it and we don't need lumber for construction, there is no oak to make barrels. And that's what happened in around 2010, 11, 12, because of the housing crisis. So the new distilleries that are going to ISC and International Stave Company and saying like, hey, I want to get some barrels, they're like, yeah, I'm sure you do, but we have a shortage and you're new, so we're taking care of our regular customers and you got to get at the end of the line. And they go, well, what do you got? And they go, well, we've got some small barrels. If you want some 10, 15, 30 gallon barrels, we have those. And they're like, are they cheaper? And they're like, no, they're the same price as 53 gallon. And so Garrison Brothers, when they started, only had access to the smaller barrels, but it developed a particular flavor profile that their customers got used to. So when 53 gallon barrels became available, they made the decision to stay with the smaller barrels so that they could be consistent and keep the product coming out the way their customers expected. Meanwhile, Balcones, that started a few months after Garrison Brothers, but released a product before they did. So those two have beef with each other about who was the first Texas whiskey. They started experimenting with larger barrels to reduce the extraction rate so that they could age the barrels for longer and give more time for esterification and development of the whiskey. And so it's two different theories. One theory is we're going to age the whiskey fast with a small barrel. The other theory is we're going to be able to age the whiskey longer because we have a larger barrel. And so I know that Garrison Brothers has switched to wine barrels, which are 60 and 63. So is Iron Root. And they've had some really good results because they track angel share loss. And so in Texas, in Scotland, you might lose 2 to 4% per year to angel share loss. Very small angel share loss, very humid there, not a lot of temperature swings. You go to Kentucky and you're talking 4 to 7%, something like that, right? But in Texas, there's some areas where you have angel share loss that's up around 15%. So if you're losing 15% of your barrel in 1 year, how many years can you age? Not 10. They'd all be empty, right?
Right.
And so to fight that, you either need a temperature controlled environment that has humidity control and temperature control, or you need to find some way to reduce the evaporative loss, and you can do that with larger barrels. So some Texas distilleries are experimenting with larger barrels. Some have said, this is our flavor profile and we're sticking with small.
Right.
And Garrison Brothers, the leader of that for sure.
That's wild.
Well, I like asking the questions because I know you have the answers. So I just want to learn.
Yeah.
So
well, we know you've got a time commitment here coming up. So we'd thank you so much for hanging out with us for so long. And
oh my God, thank you. It's ridiculous. Sure. It's like I said, I'll watch it 20 times. So just keep learning stuff because it's so awesome.
I don't know what the hell y'all are going to do with this hour and 40 minutes of video, but I feel bad for whoever's got to edit it. That's all I know. Like,
that'd be him. He's the tech guy. I
Just
don't.
go
Yeah,
through
I'll
and
release it in small clips.
just go through and pick like the little segments where I sounded really smart, and then cut
it's
everything
the
else
whole
out and
show. That's not,
just
and I'm not
release the
pandering.
solid
Like,
gold. Everyone's gonna be like, "Dang, this
Uh,
dude is on it," and be like, "No, no, no."
right?
I picked the best 15 minutes out of an hour and 40.
Remember that one time when he said his stuff's better than Buffalo Trace? That's what we're and that's all that's gonna be out there.
That's
So,
all that's on
but
there. Yeah.
this is why the internet can't be trusted is because of people like you.
but it's like but you're in control of the tech stuff, so I don't have to do that. Whatever comes out of these
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For hanging
Oh my
out with
goodness.
us for
Thank you,
the hour
guys.
and 40 minutes plus.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
If there's anything we can ever do for you, let us know. We're happy to do it.
Yeah, if you ever hear of anything from New York you'd like to get samples of, maybe we can get it to you.
Definitely.
You know,
So
if there's ever anything.
when we release in New York, I'll probably be coming out. So I may reach out and
That'd be great.
maybe we can get together.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Thank you very much, man.
All right. Well, I'm Nate.
I'm Rox.
And that's Randy.
And that's Randy. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
This is
The
the Bourbon Barrel.